Uh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day 2 of All Energy and Decarbonise. What a fantastic day 1 we had. All that buzz, the busyness. Oh, it was super. I'm Judith Patton. I'm Project Director of All Energy. I'm the co-creator originally, way back on a snowy day, or 2 snowy days, in February 2001. So we're celebrating our 21st anniversary this year. I'm standing here on behalf of RX Global to welcome you and to thank you for being with us. Our speakers, our audience, and to say a big thank you to our sponsors whose logos you saw up a few minutes ago, and all our supporting organisations. Without it, we couldn't do it. It'd be extremely boring if we were just stuck in a small room and the speakers were speaking to each other, and that was it. So we relish your presence, and we hope that you have a highly productive day today. There's so much going on in the exhibition. We have 250 to 300 exhibitors. We have in the conference an amazing 592 speakers spread not just in this room, but from 11 o'clock onwards in other rooms around the SEC, and also our quick-fire show floor theatres. So I do advise you to dip in and out of those. But right now, we have a really challenging and super session, which I'm going to pass over to Steve Scrimshaw of Siemens Energy to kick off as chairman. Thank you very much for stepping in, Steve. I should say that this session is very much the brainchild of Matthew Knight of Siemens Energy, and we are very grateful to him and sorry that he's not able to be with us today. But I think and know you're going to enjoy it, and you'll come up with some challenging questions. You'll find the microphones are numbered, so just leap up to one if you want Steve to take any notice of you. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Judith. Welcome everybody and welcome back. I hope you all had a good evening. It's maybe a reflection of how good the evening was. We have a few empty seats, but I'm sure they'll get filled up later. The housekeeping, just a reminder, emergency exits, there's no fire drills today, but if you need to leave, please follow the wardens and go through the exits, and then there's no fire alarms or drills planned, so if it happens, it's real. So please join the muster points outside the building. If you haven't already done so, if you maybe could put your phone on silent, that would be very useful. We're also going to use the Slido app to, if you want to take questions, but as Judith just said, we do have microphones. My preference is actually if you'd step up the microphone. I much prefer somebody really speaking, that'd be useful. You can do that via the Slido app, which is www.sli.do. And if you put in the code #AllEnergy22 to join as a participant. But again, as I said, you have microphones, so please use those. And with that, let's get started. Yesterday in our plenary session, we looked at COP26, 6 months on, and we heard from Alok Sharma about the urgency of decarbonisation and the global economy. Today, we want to narrow the focus down to one of the first big energy milestones for this country, a net zero GB electricity system by 2035. When the government announced this target in October, ahead of COP26, it was strongly supported by the electricity industry leaders and also by the Industry Trade Association. There's a determination amongst those of us that are in this sector to rise to the challenge, as we discussed yesterday. So the target is now set. How will we deliver? And 2035 is only 13 years away from now, so we need to crack on, as I said yesterday. Delivery at speed and scale requires huge efforts across the energy industry and our customers. What must be delivered, what's already in place, and what more will it take? To help us understand the true scale of this national endeavour, I'm delighted to introduce this glittering panel of industry leaders, and I really mean that, a really top talent group that we have today. You can read more about them each on the conference app, so just to save time, but briefly, they are Chris Stark, the Chief Executive Officer of the Climate Change Committee, so welcome Chris. We have Jeremy Allen, who's joining us online, who's the Head of the Portfolio Office from Bays in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. We have Guy Newey, who is the Director of Strategy and Performance and the CEO designate. So congratulations to you, Guy, of the Energy Systems Catapult. Lindsay McQuaid, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Scottish Power Renewables. Welcome, Lindsay. And Hannah Bromwyn, the Director of Business Development of Scottish and Southern Energy Thermal. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Chris, if you would like to give us your introduction. So thanks very much.
That was a very long walk. Good morning, everybody, and thank you to Steve, and thanks to all of you for coming out and braving your hangovers for this first session. So this morning I want to talk about something I think is very, very, very important, something I suspect we'll be talking a lot about over the course of the next few years. So that's this 2035 low-carbon electricity target. And let me say this first. This was our recommendation. So my organisation, the CCC, gave this recommendation about 18 months ago. It's from our work on the UK's 6th carbon budget. And the thing I really want to say, just to kick us off, is that it can't really be overstated how important it is that we meet this target. It's really, really important. I see it principally as an offer. So it's an offer to the good people in this country who don't have the time nor the inclination to come to conferences like this. We are saying, in effect, we're on the path to something by 2035. From then on, relax, buy your electrical device, use your heat pump, plug in your car. It's zero carbon when you use it. And I don't think you can underplay how important it is that the kind of psychological benefit of having that kind of framing there. It makes net zero much, much more appealing, I think. It makes it much more possible as well. So I think the fact that we have set that target is very, very, very important. But it's a little odd, therefore, that we haven't seen more of that kind of messaging from the political leaders who actually set it. So that's something that troubles me. If I were in politics right now, I'd be shouting it from the rooftops. We've made a big commitment like this. We're going to make it. We're going to deliver it. I was delighted when the government accepted our advice to set that goal last year. I'm a bit suspicious that we haven't seen more since on it. Signals perhaps that they haven't either understood it or that they're not really behind it. So that's what I want to try and do today, is to kind of shine a light on it, make sure that we get focused on it, because it's so important. This audience knows this, but it's still worth saying. It's going to take a concerted effort from policymakers, from industry, from consumers as well. They've got responsibilities in this transition as well to deliver that 2035 target. But it's such a good target to focus on. Such a good target, because if we achieve it, it's going to require a genuinely integrated approach to the power system. We need a strategic approach across renewables, dispatchable plant grid, hydrogen, carbon capture, storage. We need the models that make all that work, the market models to make it stick. We need a concerted set of plans, policies, or it doesn't happen. And it's one of the best, what we in the trade call composite outcomes, for that reason. Because if we're going to hit it, and I think we should hit it, then we'll also hit a set of other things that really matter to this transition in net zero. So it's really important that we do try to hit it. And given the importance of decarbonised electricity generally in this transition that's ahead of us, I don't think we'll be on the right path to net zero if we don't get there around the kind of midpoint in the 2030s. All 5 of the scenarios that we created 18 months ago to get to net zero, get there to that point in the mid-2030s, more or less, give or take a couple of years. So it's pretty fundamental. So let's just back up and define what we mean by a zero carbon electricity system. We haven't defined it too closely in the work that we've done. We've not, for example, used grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour or any kind of measure like that. Much, much more simple. What we will hopefully do is shortly end the burning of coal in this country for generation of electricity. So what we're talking principally about is the ending of unabated use of gas in the power system. I'm absolutely fine about limited use of unabated gas after 2035 if it's necessary for secure supplies. That's the kind of emergency use that we should be using fossil fuels for, very sensible. But the main task is to get to normal electricity production and make that fully zero carbon by 2035. The second task is to do so while managing a 50% probably increase in demand for electricity by around 2035, and probably a doubling of demand even more than that by 2050. By 2035, in our work at least, we estimate that that means 400 terawatt hours of new low carbon generation. Most of that will be offshore wind, some onshore, quite a lot of solar in there too. 50 terawatt hours of that though, of that new low carbon generation needs to be dispatchable. So that's hydrogen, that's gas CCS, that's BECCS perhaps. And it means developing those markets for dispatchable low carbon power over the 2020s. So we're in the decade now where we need to get going on that. We'll need to stop building and commissioning new unabated plants opening after 2030 in the modelling that we've done. So it's quite a challenge. And my question, I suppose, to you is, can we really say that we have the right steps in place to deliver all of that at the moment? All of the market models that we will need to deliver what we need from hydrogen and carbon capture, for example, the transport and storage incentives we'll need for all the investment we need in new infrastructures. I'll let you decide whether we have that at the moment. We'll be offering our assessment of that in our progress report in June. We've already suggested that the UK needs a comprehensive strategy for all of that, so a proper plan for unabated gas phase out. We also now have the government's new energy security strategy, which promises 95% low carbon electricity by 2030. So this all really needs a proper plan around it. And pretty much from now, we need any new gas plants that we're opening here in the UK to be CCS or hydrogen ready. We've got these wholesale reforms to electricity markets that are now being developed. That's great. I think we'll need to resolve the government's vision. We need a more coherent vision for that net zero electricity system through those reforms, one that has that market design to give the signals that we need for flexibility, especially for carbon capture, for hydrogen, etc. So it's tremendously exciting to do all of this, I think. I see it very much as the main transformative outcome for energy over the next decade and a little bit more in this country. It absolutely can be done. So we spent a long time in the CCC thinking about the practical aspects of achieving that target. It's very difficult, of course, but this is one of those few areas where I think we can say the ambition now for the country is in exactly the right place. So we've got the ambition in the right place. That's not the case in other parts of this transition to net zero. The risks are now around delivery. And this is my very final point. Delivery is the challenge for this particular target. And again, it's such a good thing to focus on if we care about those delivery risks. And putting a plan around that is such a good idea right now. So that's why this discussion for me is so timely. And let's get into a kind of positive, progressive discussion about how we meaningfully make the steps that we need to deliver that target. And then we'll be on the path to net zero by 2050 or even sooner. So thanks very much, Steve.
Thanks a lot, Chris. So I think Chris has given you some food for thought for the questions later on. So he posed a question to you. Maybe you can have a think about that and we can discuss it in the next session. Guy, could I ask you if you would like to?
Jeremy.
Sorry, Jeremy, wherever you are. Jeremy, can you hear us? The tech team at the back, can Jeremy hear us? There he is. Well done. Jeremy, over to you. Can you hear us? We can't hear you. Are you on mute? No. Try again. Think we can hear you now, try? No. Tech team, any good? Just try again. No, unfortunately we can't hear you. Can I suggest, if we can't fix it, can I suggest that we ask Guy to go next while the tech team try to fix that? Okay? Thank you.
What would Jeremy have said? Maybe I'll just fill in the gaps. Sure, come to that soon. So I'm going to think about what 2035, some of the questions we might think about if we do get to that power system, what we have to have in mind. I'm going to start with three perhaps quite obvious, quite glib points, but I don't think we kind of stress them enough when we're talking about this debate. So my first glib, obvious point is that electricity is
I could hear
a much
Steve
more important part of the economy than it already is. And it's obviously already hugely important, not just for the reasons that Chris was setting out about the importance of decarbonisation, but just because electricity is going to become more important for all the things we do. You know, the devices that we can't go 30 seconds without touching, the data farms, that we need to support the way our modern world looks. It's going to be a much more important part of the economy. With the move, you know, you're looking at a kind of doubling at least of the electricity system over the coming decades, which is an extraordinary change. You know, potentially 50 terawatt hours on EVs by 2030, if you believe the targets. You know, this is an absolutely massive difference. So it's the right time to be in the electricity business. Second glib, obvious point, the grid and the electricity system needs to be as reliable as we've come to expect. And we get a bit complacent about this sometimes, about what a huge success story the reliability of our current network is. But there's absolutely no way that we can compromise on that reliability. People will not accept anything less. Ministers wouldn't. There will be protests on the street, as it were. And when it is interrupted, as we've seen recently, you know, people get angry quite rightly very quickly. And you know, that reliability is under pressure at the moment. We've got a lot of, at the Catapult, we've got a lot of power system engineers. Spend a lot of time talking to them. Most of the conversations when I have with them, I come out feeling pretty nervous. You know, the system is starting to show elements of creaking. You know, weird things are happening with voltage. You know, what's happening in different local parts of the system, et cetera, is difficult. And probably the most important chart that we've got in energy policy at the moment is the one that the ESO, the Electricity System Operator, produced recently, which talked about how much of the electricity system they're having to redispatch, to restack every half an hour, which they set out quite recently. And normally, you know, the system was designed for them kind of sorting out the last 5%, just so that everything works within tolerances. And quite regularly, they're getting up to kind of 60, 65% redispatch. So understanding what is going on and what that means is really important. And of course, we had a little postcard of that from the future during COVID, when we had a collapse in demand. So you had renewables as a greater percentage of the system, and Ofgem had to do some quite heroic things, like bunging EDF a bucket load of money to be able to switch off Sizewell every now and then. That is about as far away from the kind of vision of the smart, flexible system that we all talk about as you could possibly imagine. So that transition is really important. And of course, the third point, which builds on for that, is the power system of 2035 is going to be very, very different. I'm very uncertain about a lot that's going to happen in energy policy. I think there's huge uncertainty about the technology mix going forward. But one thing I'm probably about as confident as I can be on anything is that wind is going to be the workhorse of that 2035 system. And we're piling more and more wind onto the system because of the huge success in reducing costs, which is a massive success story. But we've made nowhere near as much progress on thinking about the demand side and the flexibility side. And when I say flexibility, it's pretty broad definition. It's dispatchable power, interconnectors, demand side response, all of those areas. We haven't made as much progress on that as we should have done. And indeed, some of the ways we support renewables, whilst having a very helpful effect on cost of capital, also dampen some of the signals for flexibility, which is why it's absolutely brilliant to see the kind of review of electricity markets, because we need to think about how this is all going to work together. Because, you know, the kind of skeptics say, oh yeah, but the wind, you know, the wind doesn't blow all the time, as if this is such a brilliant, perceptive point that nobody's ever thought of before. This is a feature of this new system. It is not a bug. So we've got to design around that new system and think about what it means. Because there is incredible innovation happening all the time in this sector, including from lots of the people in this room. And we at the Catapult are very lucky to work with lots of the SMEs in this space. You know, harnessing the potential of digital technology, thinking about consumer-facing offers which are going to help people hold people's hand through this journey, getting the most out of networks. And the companies that are in this space, the OMIs, the Sunamps, the Ceros, digital engineering, Octopus, Kaluza, etc., they're incredibly exciting. And they're all trying. Some will fail, and that is exactly the part of the the revolution that we are going to go through, as well as, you know, in hydrogen turbines, in CCUS and nuclear, and some of the stuff that others will talk about. Just one brief advert, if I may, linked to that. This question about flexibility and how it's going to work. So the reason that we at the Catapult have built our living labs, now 1,000 homes, real people's homes, real energy consumers, where you can come and test what your innovation will be and find out whether consumers hate it quite quickly, or whether they love it and move forward. And we've also crucially joined up with the guys at the Power Networks Demonstration Centre at Strathclyde, just near us. So we can now test, once we've done those innovations, we can now test whether they're going to break the network and whether the network can send signals back into homes, etc. So this interface between networks and consumers, which is going to be such an important feature, it's a place to test. So come and see us at stand M66. Apologies for that advert. So what do we need to do on this? Well, we need to get market signals right. We need the markets to reflect the physics. We need to get this balance right on the planning side, particularly about, you know, having an overall coherent plan, as Chris said, but also thinking about local versus national. What's the balance of responsibility for infrastructure? This is a question that government's kind of not yet grappled with, and we've got to enable this digital system which is landing on top of the energy system to be helpful and not create new monopolies. Because I think in one of the introductions, or when Matthew emailed me, he said, you know, this is a heroic challenge, and it's heroic in both senses. It's heroic in the sense that it's really, really difficult. Like, you know, you look at some of the supply chain numbers and the fact you can't really get an EV if you live in Europe at the moment, and you think, God, are we ever going to get there? But it's also heroic in the sense that it's going to need, you know, innovation heroes, and that's an extraordinary, exciting next 15 years to be involved in the sector. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Guy. I don't believe for 1 minute that there's going to be a shortage of wind in Glasgow, certainly for the last 2 days anyway. We're going to go look at Jeremy in a minute. Before we do that, maybe if I can just throw you one question, Guy. You were at the centre of the government thinking on energy policy for a decade, and you strongly welcomed the new review of the electricity market arrangements. In 60 seconds, rather than 40 minutes, what are you most hoping for from REMA?
That's 5 of the seconds gone. I hope it really grapples with this. You know, the question at the centre of it is the cost of capital benefits you get from mechanisms like CFD. You know, is that balanced against the kind of potential system benefits you get by more flexibility? It's a really difficult, knotty question. And I think thinking about the different aspects of that, really getting into the weeds of that is going to be important. The potential of more locational wholesale markets, what might be the incentives for low carbon technologies, how are we going to make sure this future system with very different physics works. Those are the, I just hope it really gets into that analytically and works out, you know, what the real trade-offs are. Because, you know, one secret from being inside government is politicians not wild about trade-offs. They always think but the reality is, you know, the physics will always win out. So you need to think about that. You need to think about the investment signals. Yeah, and I hope that it's a really open process, that it uses the whole of the industry to do that. Again, there's always a temptation in government to be a bit closed on this.
Thanks for that. That's great. So we've got some good questions coming in on Slido. We'll do those at the end. So I think now I believe that we can connect to Jeremy. Are you there? Feels a bit like the Eurovision Song Contest. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you.
Perfect. We can hear you. Over to you, Jeremy. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everybody. Delighted to be with you, and apologies that I can't be there in person, not least to avoid the inevitable IT glitches as we do these things remotely. But anyway, I'm glad you can hear me. What I was going to do is just set out the policymakers' perspective as we think about achieving that 2035 goal, and then look forward to participating in the debate with the panel and with the audience. Forgive me if I start with a little bit of the policy context. You will be aware, I hope, that at the end of April, government published the British Energy Security Strategy, a decisive shift away from expensive fossil fuels. That I would say is not a new policy agenda. It was an agenda that the government established through the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, was amplified and taken forward through both the Energy White Paper and the Net Zero strategy through the course of 2021, but clearly represents a very significant increase in ambition around some of the key low carbon technologies that we will rely on, not least in nuclear, offshore wind and low carbon hydrogen production. It does, in the sense of raising our ambition for these key technologies, set us on a pathway to 2035 and that goal of fully decarbonised power, subject to security of supply. But as both Chris and Guy have already said, we need to move from our strategy and policy to delivery of those outcomes, so that we have confidence with industry that we will achieve that goal in that time frame. Also very pleased that in the Queen's speech on Tuesday, the government announced its intention to introduce an energy bill in this session, and that will contain the legislative measures that we will need to bring forward critical technologies like CCUS and hydrogen. So we'll be taking the powers to introduce the business models that provide revenue support for those technologies. We'll be taking forward the powers to create and operationalise the future system operator, amongst other things. And we'll have more to say on the content of the bill as we move towards introduction. All that speaks to the kind of the role of government here, which is to create the market frameworks, support regulation, support and enable system rules. But clearly we rely on industry to build and operate. And that's the national endeavour that is the theme of this conference, and which we need to continue to strengthen. I think the challenge, the policymaker, when we look forward, is that we're not dealing with a static picture. We're not dealing with an electricity system that we grew to know and love, pre and post privatisation. Chris has mentioned, and we're very aware that demand for power is going to increase significantly out to 2035 with the electrification of heat and transport, up to 60% more demand over current levels on that pathway to potentially doubling of demand by 2050. We're running to stand still in some ways because we are seeing significant retirements of capacity, not least in the current nuclear fleet, coal coming off the system, no doubt some of the older CCGTs as well. So as well as building for extra capacity, we're building to replace, and that's the challenge for all of us. Guy referenced, we're moving from that sort of one-directional, large centralised plants to something that's much more multi-directional, something that's going to be far more decentralised as a system, with local flexibility markets at the distribution level, with key roles for renewables, storage and demand management, greater smartness in the system, enabling that active demand side response, which will all be essential and useful features, but adds to the sense that we're evolving the electric system into a new place, and how we achieve our goals for decarbonisation will be more challenging as a result of that dynamism in the system. I agree with Guy. If we're confident of anything, it is that the future power mix will be predominantly wind and solar. But we see very important roles for nuclear and power CCUS as we look at today's technologies, and critically for technologies that provide system flexibility, whether that's storage, more interconnection with continental markets, the potential role of low carbon hydrogen in power. Just wanted to say something about, therefore, as we gear ourselves up to deliver against the commitments that government has entered into, some of the challenges that we will need to address in our plans. The obvious one to say, although perhaps it does need saying, is that as we move our system forward, as we add new capacity, as we introduce smartness, as we reform markets, we need to maintain an operable, resilient power system. No modern economy can work without the reliability of secure power. It's going to be critical to have that confidence, not least because as we electrify heat and transport, we will not succeed in our ambitions in those sectors unless there's the confidence that the power will be there to provide alternative fuels to the current arrangements. Power has to be affordable to consumers. We are seeing how cost of living is dominating the debate at the moment. And as we move forward, we have to do everything we can to ensure that power remains affordable, both to households, but also to businesses, where international competitiveness will be a key feature of their success operating in the UK. And of course, what we build and the system that we have as a result has to be low carbon, as Chris said. We're not going to get to net zero unless the electricity system is playing its full part, both as a source of emissions in its own right and as a vector for decarbonising other sectors. So right there, you've got that, what used to be called the trilemma, something that's secure, operable, but affordable, but also low carbon. That remains a considerable challenge for all of us. To cater to that increase in demand, we're going to be building arguably an unprecedented scale and pace for the next 10 to 15 years. That in itself puts demands on industry in terms of access to skilled labour, supply chain capacity, access to capital from domestic and international capital markets. We don't underestimate the challenge of those things. We've set clear targets and ambitions through the white paper, particularly through the new energy security strategy, 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, up to 24 gigawatts of nuclear by 2050. But as we establish these ambitions to provide clarity and confidence to the industry to bring projects forward, we need to think about how we optimize the generation mix around these known technologies. What is the optimal, efficient, low-cost system that brings together predominantly renewables with nuclear and power CCUS, but in a way that makes sense from a system point of view, from an affordability point of view? Did markets do that? Is that something for the future system operator? What is the role of government in helping to optimize a system? We're doing that against the fact that some of those technologies, particularly renewables, deploy quickly. Some, like nuclear, have long lead times, and some technologies have yet to be fully commercialized, which just adds perhaps to the complexity and the challenge that we will face. But optimizing to provide resilience, security of supply, and affordability is something that we are going to have to address collectively. And that's before we think about the new technologies that we want to bring, that will come through our innovation and R&D processes. Technologies that we may only just be beginning to conceive of, but create a broader set of options for us to deliver that low-cost, reliable, low-carbon system. Knowing which good options to follow, knowing which to deploy and when is a challenge again for government, for industry, and for regulators and system operators. Do very strongly endorse Guy's point about whole system approach. One of the really good things about the energy security strategy from the policymaker point of view was that it couched the deployment of technologies like nuclear and renewables in whole system thinking. And that's critical for us. So system governance, market arrangements, approach to designing and delivering networks. These are the essential conditions and environment into which we will drop new capacity, and we were very focused on getting those right. Both Chris and Guy mentioned we announced and will be proceeding at pace with the review of market arrangements. So just one sign of our focus around critical system enablers, absolutely key for us. We're going to have to do all of this in a way that provides clarity, stability to some degree to investors. We rely on private capital to get things built and to operate our plants. The success of the CFD, of the capacity market, shows that creating mechanisms based in law with the protection of law enables capital to flow to our market, reduces the cost of capital, key determinants of affordability. And we need to maintain that even as we envisage the need for future reform of market arrangements. Keeping the confidence of investors, keeping that capital flowing into our market is absolutely essential. Final point from me. Doing all of this, we should be alive to the major dependencies, the key risks that we face collectively to achieve our ambitions. These could be sort of almost externalities to power, so the planning system, how we get infrastructure consented and built in a reasonable time in a way that still manages the environmental impacts of infrastructure, takes account of the interests of the communities that host that infrastructure. We are looking to make the planning system, certainly for England, where efficient, to allow renewables, particularly offshore wind, to come forward at pace. But we will need to do that in a way that makes sense to all the parties to the planning system, and we don't underestimate that challenge. We're going to be driven to some degree by the scale and pace of electrification in heat and transport, and those are, in a sense, externalities to the power system, but key to how much demand we will face. They will have impacts on changing patterns of demand that we'll need to think about. And finally, although I think we will back up our ambition with delivery, we do have to conceive of contingencies if, for whatever reason, we're not able to deploy technologies at the scale and pace that we are aiming to do. That speaks to us of the need for options that you can bring forward if, in the event that technologies you assume would play a critical part can't deploy perhaps the scale and pace that you might have envisaged. So having a broad basket of options, knowing when to deploy those as contingency, will be part of our challenge. But it's a national endeavour, as the theme of this conference, and we're up for it. We've set our plans, and to assure Chris and you in the audience, we are now very focused on delivery and the need to get cracking on this. It is not a lot of time to do it, but we think we can. Steve, back to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Would you like a round of applause? So some interesting points from Jeremy there. I think especially the option question, if the technology is not available. Before we'll let you go into the background, Jeremy's going to join us, stay there for questions, etc. I've personally noticed a much greater engagement with industry in terms of consulting, especially around the hydrogen. If I look at the hydrogen team, they've been doing a lot of that very well. Has this helped Bayes' thinking, and do you see that sort of trend continuing?
Absolutely, Steve. We cannot make policy, we can't implement policy without taking the views of our stakeholders. That's clearly those in industry, because they will have to work with the rules and the policies that we make. Creating that and implementing it without understanding their views it just doesn't work. And so you will see through, I hope industry has seen through all the things we've been doing over the last since we've been on this decarbonisation journey, has a sense that we reach out and speak to all our stakeholders. But that will only increase, I think, as we grapple with this challenge. I think you will see that almost in the next phase as we move to the review of electricity market arrangements. Sometimes we do hear a little bit of frustration with the amount of consultation that we do, but we don't see any choice in that. We need to bring our key stakeholders with us. We need to understand industry, in many cases also those who are users of the system, whether they are representatives of households or businesses. We need to get those collective views, and that is why we do try to reach out as much as possible. I can only see that increasing in the coming years.
Great. I'd like to give a thank out. I know government get criticised a lot, but I'd like to give a shout out for the hydrogen policy team, because I think it's been benchmark what they've been doing, so you can pass that on from me. Okay, so we'd like to move on now to Lindsay, who's going to give us some insight into deliverability of renewable electricity.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Steve. So delivering renewable energy, you might wonder why I'm standing up here. That's business as usual and has been for a great number of years for many in this room. So why are we talking about it? Well, what's changed? There's been a renewed interest, that focus and delivery, that societal awareness following COP26 and indeed the pandemic, that there has to be a green recovery, that the renewable industry has to fundamentally be driving that impact. With the 2035 electricity target now announced and the new energy security strategy, there's a need to consider how we can develop, invest and operate more capacity that's variable in its source more quickly than we've ever done it before. And with net zero already committed to, that's our starting position, and coming out, we really need to get there as fast as we possibly can. Then going back, it's taken us 30 years to get to where we are today. So we've got roughly 14 gigawatts apiece of onshore wind, offshore wind and solar, the majority of which has been delivered in the last decade. Trying to do that in the next 13 years will require a substantive rethink across all parties involved in this delivery process. I recall a discussion a number of years ago in the final dying days of the renewables obligation, a mechanism that did exactly what it was supposed to. It fostered the renewables industry. The decarbonisation of the electricity sector was done. Onshore wind was done. Subsidy mechanisms were a thing of the past. That box had been ticked, and there was a need to move on to transport and heat. However, if we were to decarbonise transport and heat, where was the source of that energy going to come from? Innovation around onshore and offshore wind and cost reduction in those technologies and in solar means that renewables will continue to have a significant, if not heavily influencing, position around the decarbonisation of that wider economy, that whole system that Guy talked about. The targets that have been set recently helpfully recognise this, and electrifying every home by 2035, increasing the target by 10 gigawatts to 50 by then, a figure only thought previously possible by 2050, really does set the challenge. This is a big picture, big delivery target, and it's now supported by a development pipeline of over 60 gigawatts of offshore wind across the UK, a market that the rest of the world can look on with some envy. We are at the front of the offshore wind revolution. It will be the backbone of our electricity system and our plans for decarbonisation. And it will be complemented by industry commitments to more than double onshore wind and quadruple solar in the UK. What's fantastic about what we're talking about is that all of these technologies are here today. They're proven, they're deployable, they're cost effective, cheap as well, and incredibly green. They're not some way off in the future. What is changing is how we're using them. What is changing is the fact that they're allowing us to access other energy vectors, such as hydrogen, to then decarbonise those hard-to-get-to parts of the economy. With the correct mechanisms, some of which Jeremy's already touched upon, policy levers, regulatory frameworks and reviews, I've every confidence that we can achieve those targets. But that means that the hard work has to start today. We really need to rethink our approach. With this scale of development opportunity, that requires to be deployed in half the time, less than half the time that it's taken to form the industry that we all have today, we need a big plan, a grand plan, a transformation on all fronts to ensure development can be executed efficiently and that people and consumers are engaged in this process. They have a larger role to play in this energy transition than they ever have before. This work is underway, but from my perspective, it's frustratingly slow. Planning reform was repeatedly delayed, and once it was issued for consultation, from my perspective again, it was disappointing. We are not setting the bar high enough for where we need to get to. We are not pushing for the change we need to see if we are to achieve those targets. We need to solve the barriers, enhance the efficacy of the planning process, both north and south, and in respect of renewables, create a grid system that can cope with those technologies coming on and the ancillary technologies that will be neighbouring them, and make sure that we can deliver that whole system view that has been set out. From a Scottish Power perspective, I'm ready. We currently have 2.8 gigawatts of operational renewable plan and an enviable pipeline following our considerable success in the recent ScotWind round. So we've got close to 8 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity in our pipeline, and that's complemented by close to 7 gigawatts in our onshore pipeline. That includes repowering of onshore wind, a fundamental aspect that we cannot ignore. We can't step back. We can't lose that capacity that we already have in the ground, and we need to make sure that we are replacing that as efficiently as possible with the latest technology if we are to achieve the targets. We need to make sure that our baseline takes all of that into account. When these barriers are removed, because it can't be an if, and there's a fair number of them, we will need all the parties involved to play their part. At SPR, we've launched our energy park model. That ensures that we are optimising every single megawatt hour that's coming from one of our sites, and whether that is in pure energy to be used in homes and businesses across the land, or to support services to the grid operation and provide that resilience that Guy's talked on, we've got that at our forefront. Our applications going forward won't just feature a single technology. They'll comprise wind, storage, solar, and even the production of hydrogen all in one place. The challenge is, this is new. People haven't done it before. You put multiple technologies in a single application, and a local planning officer looks at it aghast and starts asking you to delete parts of it. That means another planning application is coming in 6 months later. Another application will come in 6 months after that for the battery that you really wanted there. That's building inefficiency at a time when we need efficiency and focus. I need whomever is receiving that application to be ready. I need whomever is receiving that application and the stakeholders reviewing that application, and indeed the communities receiving that application, to be prepared to receive it, to understand it, to engage. And a lot of that responsibility is in me and my team to make sure that we tell our story and that people understand the journey that we're on. The other side needs to be appropriately resourced to catch it though. Otherwise, we are never going to get there. A lot needs to be done at local, devolved and national levels. Planning can be quick. I've got examples in my own pipeline where I've seen a process conclude in 12 months from the point of application to consent, but that's the exception rather than the rule. More likely, I'm waiting 3 to 5 years for an onshore wind farm and even up to 10 years for offshore. We can't go on if we want to deliver on the targets that have been set. The other rub is I'll also need a timely connection. Grid companies need a model that works for them to make the investment they need into the grid so that we can get those assets online as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And finally, the market mechanisms that need to come forward. Frustratingly, renewables was viewed as just producing megawatt hours for a while. It can do an awful lot more. And we are pushing the bounds. We are developing new products from our sites as well. So voltage control, constraint management, frequency response, and black start capability are now all capable from renewables. That's something that, again, the electricity system operator has to be ready to catch. The forthcoming CFD is also the perfect opportunity to really get ourselves ready, to put ourselves to work. However, as the rules currently stand, and when I say we, the royal we, we're allowing the UK to under-deliver on that cheap green homegrown energy as the rules currently sit in that auction. According to analysis that we've done internally, I see that potentially 4 to 5 gigawatts of what could be termed as shovel-ready projects will miss out. At a time of energy crisis, at a time when energy security is being talked about, that feels like false economy. Competition is important, but it also means that gigawatts of plant that could otherwise have been delivered will not progress prior to 2025. The annual auction process helps a bit, but we're also missing that initial jump, that at a time immediately coming out of COP26, with all of the platitudes and commitments that were made then, we're actually not really hitting the goal. And then we look at other targets and issues around aviation and within planning as well. Working groups. We love a working group in our sector. I'm quite sure a number of you attend them as often as I do, and I can see colleagues that I've spoken to at various forums over the years. We need to solve those problems. These working groups need to be targeted, they need to be focused, we need to make sure that they're output orientated, we need to move faster. In the opening session, comments from both Keith as my boss and the First Minister as sort of my other boss, I suppose, when she sets the agenda, might not have felt like new news, but given the imperatives that COP26 and net zero have set and the commitments that have been made through the energy security strategy, we need to get these building blocks operating in a way that they simply have not done before. If we are to achieve change at pace, planning reform is vital. Access to grid needs to be timely and dynamic, and access to route to market to ensure finance continues to flow into the UK means that those mechanisms have to be transparent and predictable. The supply chain needs confidence to invest. I need confidence to invest in my pipeline, and the assets will come through. We need to learn from the past 30 years. We need to get better at removing barriers. We need to have objectives of efficiency and delivery at the very heart of planning, regulatory and market reform. As Chris touched on in his opening comments, we all have skin in this game as a society. It's too important not to. But the people in this room are who can make this work. So I implore you all to take action. I implore you all to think about your steps and your commitment to how you change the delivery and the achievement of targets. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Some really interesting material there. The big plan, the grand plan. You can see this national endeavour I mean, quite shocking to hear of 45 gigawatts potentially constrained. I was going to ask the question about how deliverable do we think the big plan of Boris Johnson is of slashing the time for planning, and how realistic is that going to be? But I think we'll leave that for another time. Can we ask you if you'd like to take the stage now? Hannah, thank you. We've got lots of questions coming in, especially lots from Anonymous. So thanks for all those.
Hi everyone. So I like that Lindsay and I are a little sort of live, personalised representation of the power system merit order here. So as Miss Renewables there takes a seat, I'm here to talk about our work in SSE and flexible generation and energy storage activities, which is the focus of our thermal business. And in particular, our drive now is to decarbonise our fleet using carbon capture and storage and hydrogen technologies. Now, SSE's strategy is fully aligned to net zero, and like all of the other panelists here, we see renewables as providing the backbone of our future energy system. As an organisation, we've set ourselves tight science-based targets aligned to 1.5 degrees, and by 2030, we're looking to cut our carbon emissions by 80% and increase our renewable output fivefold to 50 terawatt hours a year by 2030. To deliver these goals, we've set out our Net Zero Acceleration Programme in November, and that committed us to £12.5 billion of investment into low-carbon infrastructure by 2026. So these are bold ambitions, and they'll put us on the path to a low-carbon, decarbonised power system by 2035, which, as the panellists have pointed out, is an important and challenging target. So today, I'm here to talk to you about the role that we see for dispatchable low-carbon generation in that. We have an existing gas-powered fleet, and I think the starting point is that it's really important to acknowledge the role that that plays and its vital importance in our energy system now. As Guy said, I think we maybe got a bit complacent about that in the past, and it probably hasn't been talked about enough by us or by others. As an example, and the examples all the time, but if we just look last year, from April to September, at SSE, our renewable generation was 35% lower than we expected it would be, and that was just to do with weather conditions, so low wind and dry weather conditions. What happens to fill that gap is, of course, the gas stations turn on and keep the lights on and balance the system. And that is going to continue to be incredibly important as renewable penetration increases, as we and our colleagues at Scottish Power and others continue to build out the renewables across the country. There are still going to be those gaps, and as Guy joked, insightfully, the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And the dispatchable low-carbon generation that we have and we're looking to build is the exact right plug to fit those gaps. So, we know that flexible generation is incredibly important to the system now. We know that we need to decarbonise that flexible generation. And I think it's incredibly important that a company like SSE, who are deeply committed to net zero, understand the current gas assets, know how to build cutting-edge new technologies, and can apply that expertise to this challenge, are custodians of that transition, managing the existing fleet and building the new low-carbon alternatives. The low-carbon alternatives that we're talking about here are fundamentally power stations equipped with CCS and hydrogen-fired generation, complemented by storage technologies such as pumped hydro. These technologies, power CCS and hydrogen power, will play a vital role in an affordable, net zero, secure energy system. And that affordability is key. We often hear the question, how much is power CCS going to cost for the energy consumer? Can we afford to do it? The LCP economists have done a report, and it's public and it's on our website, which says that actually if you put 2.5 gigawatts of power CCS onto the system by 2030, they estimate that that would reduce the cost of the energy system for customers by £7.5 billion in 2050. So actually, we need to flip that question round. It's not how much does this cost, it's how much does this save for the energy consumer, and can we afford not to do it? I would say not. So power CCS and hydrogen turbines will provide a vital service to the energy system. They'll get us to net zero, and they will do it at lowest cost. For those reasons, we're actively developing projects at the moment. We've got planning applications in for 2 power CCS projects, one in Peterhead in northeast of Scotland, and another at our Kidby site in the Humber region. And we submitted bids for these projects as part of the UK government cluster sequencing process. I'm sure, like many of you here, we're eagerly awaiting the outcome of the next phase of that competition and looking forward to hearing government's plans for further clusters. We're also progressing our plans for low-carbon hydrogen. So at Kidby, we're looking to develop a hydrogen-powered generating plant, which would be the world's first major 100% hydrogen-fueled plant. And at Aldborough, which is on the East Yorkshire coast, we're looking to develop a hydrogen storage facility which would help balance demand and supply for hydrogen in the region. It could be used in the Kidby power stations, but also for other end users in the region. These projects will also deliver a just transition. SSE was actually the first company in the world to publish a just transition strategy, and it's incredibly important to us to use the skills, use the expertise, and use the natural assets that we have in these regions of the UK and across the country. So today we've actually published our socioeconomic report on the impacts of the Peterhead carbon capture project. I think there are copies knocking around, which underlines the benefit to the UK economy as being £1.2 billion over the life of the project. So, to put simply, we think power CCS and hydrogen are the right things to do, and that we need a lot of them. Aurora have done some analysis looking at the looming capacity gap that we have in the UK and the carbon budgets, and saying actually to meet those kind of constraints at lowest cost, we need about 7 gigawatts of power CCS by 2030 and 11 gigawatts by 2035. That is a lot more than the government's minimum commitment of at least 1 power CCS project in the middle of this decade. And I don't think I'm alone in taking that view. I mean, Chris and colleagues at the CCC have set out the need for multiple power CCS projects by 2030. I think if we look at the Energy Systems Catapult, they kind of optimized energy systems modeling out to 2050, shows the need for about 20 gigawatts of gas for CCS and 30 gigawatts of hydrogen peaking plant. That's huge. If we're going to reach those volumes, we need to start investing at scale now. And we can't close down our existing assets until we've got these new assets online. The good news is, I think it really does feel like things are moving on now, and with government policy, technology advancements, and industry appetite all aligning, it does really feel like the time is now for CCS and hydrogen. But the clock's ticking. As Chris said, 2035 is not that far away, so we need to make big strides now in the short term. So just to summarize, what we're doing to make the transition is managing our existing gas fleet sensibly, making sure that they're available when the system needs them, investing in low-carbon technologies and delivering first-of-a-kind cutting assets in the UK, and collaborating with our partners and supply chain in the industrial clusters to help to build a low-carbon industry here in the UK.
Thanks very much, Anna. I don't know about all of you, but I'm sitting here inspired by what's going on. And I mean, if you're starting your career again, what would be a better place to start your career in? Somewhere like this is amazing. So we've had a lot of questions coming in. So I think what we're going to do is we'll go to the questions that we've had in through Slido. If anybody wants to put a special question in, please put your hand up and you can go to one of the mics. So I think we'll just go. I think if I click this, hopefully, I don't know if it appears up on the screen, does it? No? So I think the first one is for you, Chris. How do you see the mix of baseload power by 2035 and the main risks of getting to this mix? Oh yeah, we've got it on the screen. That's good.
Great. Well, look, there's a panel here that will have different answers to this, and actually no one really knows the answer to this question. But it's not a term we use very much, actually. So we talk about firm power, and that majority of that, I assume, will be nuclear. So it's kind of an interesting question about what happens with nuclear over that period. In our assessment, we'll be back to the generating capacity of nuclear by 2035 that we have today. But we'll see lots of retireals over that period. So that's the kind of main answer to that question. But it's not a very, if I may, I think there's a more interesting kind of answer or question, I suppose, that you can ask, which is the mix generally. And I think everyone has touched on this idea that we will have vast majority of power coming from variable renewables and a system that's set up to manage that. We will be there by 2035, and then we'll continue to grow that out into the 2040s with a zero carbon power system. The biggest risk to all of that is all the stuff that we've heard, the kind of very mundane things like planning, like consenting, I see as the biggest challenge. And the fact that we are right now reforming the kind of wholesale market for all of this so that we get the signals right. And it's quite an impressive feat if we can pull all of this off. But we are really against the clock. I mean, I really, really agree with what Hannah said there. So we haven't got too much time to do the design of those policies. We haven't got too much time to have an industry ready to receive those policies, to then turn that into real investment and physical plant on the ground. So it's very, very tough. But this 2035 point is just so important. I know it's only 13 years. You're absolutely right, Steve. But it is possible, I think, to get to that point and to see us, land at 30 thereabouts, where we can start switching off the unabated gas in the power system and start switching to the kind of things that Hannah talked about.
Okay.
And then I think we're into the kind of the right mix at that point.
Okay. Well, I've got you sort of on. I'll pick this one as well, which is from Almit, from the Crown Estate Scotland. You used the word plan in your opening speech, but thus far most or all of the government's approach have been policy-led. Can the panel comment on the need for plans?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I don't want to hog it, but I think when I say a plan, I'm quite happy for that to be a policy-led thing. I mean, that's naturally where we will end up. But I do think there is a bit of architecture required in this. We will need some sort of oversight of it. And if we step back from just the power target, we've got all sorts of things happening in the energy system more widely. I'm pretty excited about the fact that we are moving to a world where you've got some kind of oversight across various vectors and various types of infrastructure in the energy sector, including things like district heating. That's what I mean by a plan. I think a plan is probably the right term for the phasing out of unabated gas, though. So we really do need to start thinking actively about how physical power stations start moving off unabated use of gas into something else or closing altogether. Okay.
Is anybody else who would like to comment, Jeremy or Guy?
I'll come in first just on the plan. So completely endorse what Chris said. What we don't need, I don't think, is a kind of centrally planned kind of GOS plan for the system. It's much more about what the system architecture, as Chris said. I think that's the right term. But there is a big strategic question which sits behind that, which is how much does the government want it to be kind of centrally planned? We're going to have X gigawatts of nuclear, X gigawatts of CCS, X gigawatts of offshore wind, versus how much is going to have kind of technology mix revealed through market processes. And I think, and that balance between demand and supply side. And I really think that's a big strategic question that government's kind of ducked at the moment. It talks about it wants markets, and then every kind of tendency is, we'll give this technology a firm contract, this technology, and suddenly there's not much left to play in. I think the other thing is, at a local level, and this links to Lindsay's points about planning, is actually when you've got monopoly infrastructure at local level, that's an area where we do need more planning, energy planning, so hopefully that would help speed up some of those processes. But again, government hasn't quite settled on its balance between national and local responsibilities in this sector. I think that's part of the reason you've got all these local authorities declaring climate emergencies of some eye-watering levels of ambition and absolutely no idea about what they do on Monday. And they need to say, right, we need a heat network here, we need a network infrastructure upgrade here. You've still got markets and innovation happening around that, but unless we get that monopoly infrastructure working at local level, then we're doomed.
Okay, thank you. There's a gentleman over there, microphone number 4.
I'm Theo Horton from Wind Farm Analytics. Don't you guys know that the wind doesn't blow all the time? And Wind Farm Analytics has been asking a question, I'll ask it again, for the last 10 years. Why don't we, if you support wind energy, why don't you immediately set up competitive auctions for 5,000 gigawatt hours of energy storage, with the winner being decided on cheapest per megawatt hour stored over the lifetime? Pumped hydro is long life, 100 years, cheapest energy storage per stored megawatt hour because of that long life, both for domestic consumers tackling fuel poverty and also for commercial consumers helping our economy. It's a tried and tested technology, unlike carbon capture. It's flexible. It's providing green jobs in planning, construction and operations. It's low carbon, it's efficient, it's non-polluting, it's local, not dependent on foreign energy markets like interconnectors. It's the large scale we need. Thank you.
Could you give us your name? We're going to have you on the panel next time.
I missed you, Theo.
Theo Holton, Wind Farm Analytics offers energy storage plus renewables, time series simulation and project optimization.
Was it Theo? Is that right?
And also policy work.
He's available for hire outside.
Hey, Chris.
Anna, do you want to take that?
Yeah, we also love pumped storage. And in fact, we're developing Corrie Glass, which would be the first, I think, large-scale pumped storage to be built in the UK in about 30 years. You know, I've got colleagues who've been working away at that since about 2005 with absolute conviction that it is what the energy system needs, and finally have feeling that maybe the rest of the country is catching up and agree with them on that. I think there's a place for all of these technologies. You know, one of the advantages possibly of net zero is that it's really reduced the option space and it becomes an and conversation. So yeah, absolutely pumped storage has got a place. Yes, battery storage has got a place. You know, yes, other forms of long duration storage have got a place, and within those longer periods, dispatchable power generation is critically important.
Thank you. Excellent. So we have another one here, which is, I'm going to give this one to Chris again, when this is your last one, I'll pass on to somebody else. If delivery is now the challenge, what's the role for the CCC? Someone independent needs to monitor and push.
Well, I'm very happy to do a bit of this. I mean, I think it's really important to say the CCC is not, it's not an energy regulator, and I don't want to be. I mean, occasionally I think we're sort of presented in that way, and it's quite an uncomfortable place for us. So we're here to do the job that we were set up to do, which is to look at the targets that the UK and Scotland and Wales and soon Northern Ireland will have on climate, advise on what the right level of the target is, advise on how you can reach those targets, and then do the job of monitoring progress. For me, the interesting job is that I think we are moving away, well, I hope we are moving away now from setting these big grand targets across the whole of the economy. Who knows, we may return to them, but I don't think we'll do so. We certainly shouldn't do so for several years. We've got them laid out. Mostly, not in every area, mostly we have policy in areas across the whole economy now to drive that decarbonisation that we need to meet those targets. We could debate in a longer session whether that policy is in the right kind of form, whether it will be successful. The challenge is all about delivering against those things now. And that's an easy thing for me to say. In fact, I have been saying it now for a couple of years. But if we're going to be true to that in the CCC, what we need is a better model of how we think that change needs to take place. That starts at the top, of course, with some sort of emissions target across the sectors, but moves in swiftly to the kind of outcomes that would drive that. And crucially, the policies, but also the on-the-ground stuff that will tell us whether we're really on the course to meet the various targets that we have across the sector. And it's the on-the-ground stuff that really matters. So right now, and in fact you'll see it in about a month's time, we've completely revamped the model of progress monitoring that we present to Parliament each year. We're going to present a new way of presenting monitoring of progress in our latest report, which is coming at the end of June. And within that, there is a much better, it's great, it's properly good, and it doesn't matter whether you like progress monitoring or not. It's really exciting to see how it's come together. We've spent a year on it. We've got a much better articulated sense of how that change I talked about will take place. And then we have some metrics that we can put against those on-the-ground things that I talked about. And we will move to monitoring that stuff much more than we monitor the policy stuff. And it's that tells you whether you're really on track to hitting these targets, I think. So look out for that, because in the end, if we all agree that these are the right metrics, then we can all get focused on the right stuff and we can start motoring.
Thanks, Chris. Jeremy, I don't know if you're, are you online? Hopefully you are. Do you want to add anything to that in terms of having someone independent to monitor and push? We can't hear you. We can now.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
So I think I'm in agreement with Guy and Chris. We have policies in place. In a sense, the power sector may be in a relatively better place to some other sectors, which still has to think through sort of where policies will deliver the emissions reductions that we need to see against our net zero ambitions. I think in power we know what we need to do, and we have policies and ambitions in place. It is absolutely about delivery. And with Guy, I don't think a sort of a centralised 5-year plan is the way to go forward, which is rigid, inflexible, not susceptible to the flexibility and change that we may need as we see technology options mature. But we do have to have a sense of progress. And it's interesting to hear what Chris has said about the CCC's work in this. I think certainly from my perspective, we are now bending our mind to how we anticipate the progress and track it in real time, and critically, I think, anticipate the big decision points we will have where we have options for new technologies, or we have a point in our pathway of delivery where we have a decision to take over further reforms of markets or systems. Being able to track that and engage in real time rather than in hindsight is something that we have to work towards as policymakers, and we need to do that in collaboration with our partners in industry, regulation, and system operation. I think we're very hopeful that the future system operator has a critical role here, but we have to create that system operator, because we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. That body has to be brought into existence, find its feet, and get cracking on its day job, as well as thinking strategically about the needs of the system over long time frames. But we can see ourselves moving to where the policymaker is able to reach out to that expert, impartial view from the system operator, the view of the regulator, the views of industry, in a way that shares the perspective and allows us a better place to adapt our plans as we deliver those things. And I think that's something we are looking forward to. That we're not that shared insight, the ability to anticipate collectively where the system needs to go. So I think we look forward to as we get the FSO up and running, and we see the regulator performing his role. That's a sort of ongoing real-time debate that is going to be very valuable to us.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Did you want to comment, Guy? No. Okay. So I've got one here. I think we'll give to you, Lindsay. So, which is, despite the planned build-out of offshore and onshore wind in Scotland, do we risk missing net zero targets until we adopt locational nodal pricing? Is that one for you?
Thanks, Jack. The grid charging mechanism is not fit for purpose. The grid charging mechanism is not fit for purpose. It needs a substantial rethink. Those that have been in the industry as long as I have, clearly I joined when I was 10, recall Transmit and the pain that we all went through then. And the recall I have is talking to colleagues that Transmit took longer than the Second World War. We now find ourselves in another war, which is horrific. I hope to God that grid reformation takes less time than sorting out the mess that we currently see in Eastern Europe, and what that's meant for the energy consumer and energy markets globally. The nodal pricing, occasional and nodal pricing, I will defer to colleagues in my organisation that are a hell of a lot more equipped to describe the technicalities of what that would deliver. But there needs to be a change. We need to change our way of thinking. The valuable resource we have in the north has to be stimulated and invested in. We need the efficient mechanism to ship it south. We can't let grid charging undermine the ambitions around Scotland in particular, the fantastic resource we've got in the north and other parts of the country. And we need a regulator that's fit to cope with the degree of change and basically ripping up the rule book on grid charging and having another rethink.
Thank you. Guy, do you want to answer that?
I think this is, you asked me about the questions that the REMA process, the government process, is going to focus on, and this is absolutely front and centre on there. I think in the future world, the idea that we'd have a single national half-an-hour wholesale price for electricity versus the diversity of what's happening on the ground will seem quaint. I absolutely see all the risks in terms of how long these changes should happen, but the risks of us not getting on and not getting ahead of these areas are very significant. And the biggest threat to net zero as a kind of collective endeavour is if you have kind of operability challenges. That will trump everything. And you'll see politicians running away from it as quickly as possible. So getting that wholesale market, which I think is absolutely essential, so that it encourage flexibility and give the signals, and also for it's not just the kind of firm power, non-firm power. To Lindsay's point about all the innovations happening around the wind sector in terms of ancillary services is an incredibly exciting story, but we don't yet kind of have the mechanisms to unlock it. So I think locational pricing, nodal pricing will be very important, and we've got a piece of work coming out very soon. Couldn't quite get it out for today, but very soon talking about that.
Thanks, Guy. We're going to have a couple of quick questions now. This one's for you, Hannah. What percentage of CO2 can current carbon capture technology abate, and how do you expect that until 2035?
Yeah, so I mean, it's in the mid-90s, and really great innovation going on in that space, including work that we're doing with Equinor in Norway at the Technology Mongstad Centre. I think where the interesting developments here will be is around how you can maintain that abatement whilst being incredibly flexible and agile, and that's the kind of thing that we're working on in the Innovation Centre. How do we expect it to develop to 2035? I mean, I think as we've seen across the energy sector, we get better at things by doing them. And so I would come back to let's get going, let's get some scale here, and I have absolute confidence that that will improve as we build out further.
Yeah. I would build upon that just from my knowledge and experience. I think there is plans in place to sort of improve solvents and things as you go through, so I think that rate will probably increase. Sorry, I ignored the lady's stand over there. Apologies for that.
Hi, my name's Hazel Dalgard and I work at the Scottish Funding Council. So we sponsor all the further education, higher education bodies in Scotland. But I'm really interested in the discussion, and I'd like to bring it back to the consumer perspective, because as politicians reform the electricity markets, they will very much be having to deal with the media. The media will be asking them a lot of questions about the consumer. So what is your prescription for the consumer? What would you like the consumer to do? How would you like them to behave to try and drive this over, say, the next 2-3 years, 5 years and 10 years? That's practically a plan. But yeah, just some insight into, for those who have the ability to make changes, what would you like the consumer to do?
Okay, that's a good question. Guy?
Great question, and absolutely the hardest part. I talked about, interruptions would be one thing that stalls any progress on net zero, but if consumers are finding all of this transition more difficult than it should be, then we're also, they've got a veto on net zero is the reality. So what do we need to do? So we need to make it, a couple of more glib points, which I don't think get enough focus on. We need to make it as easy as possible for people to move to these new energy services. I'm not necessarily convinced by the model that we're all going to become kind of evening energy traders and turning on our washing machines depending on what's happening in the global gas market, for example. I think lots of that's going to be automated, which you need to consent to that, and you need to agree to that, so that needs to be easy, but people need to see the benefit. On the power sector side, and thinking more widely in the power sector side, it's got to be better than what people have at the moment if we want to get the pace of change we want. The kind of model of environmentalism, which is the kind of hair shirt that we're all going to be quite comfortable about having the odd brown out, is nonsense. And I know at a kind of political level that doesn't happen, but sometimes you get that debate. So that's particularly in the heating space. How do we make the heating experience, which for lots of people at the moment is a bit rubbish, drafts and damp and boilers being oversized and not working properly, etc., etc., etc. How do we make that really good and happens to be low carbon, so people desire that? And I think having that focus on that, there's lots of companies trying to work out where they do. It's a crucial role for companies who are going to hold the hand of the customer through that. And that's, I think, the most exciting space over the next 10 years, as well as all the big tech we've talked about. Those companies who are going to really hold people's hand and make it easy for them and desirable. If you can do that, then there's a massive market to take advantage of.
Okay, thanks, Guy. So, quick fire questions. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to take a few. Do you support, and we'll just go across the panel, do you support the scale of nuclear increase proposed by the UK government? And I think we should start with the UK government. Jeremy?
I think the answer is probably yes.
All right.
Aye.
It doesn't.
So that was a yes, okay. Hannah?
So, look, I said earlier, I think in a net zero world, we're going to need all the technologies we've got to throw at this challenge. I think, and actually personally, as someone who spent a few years working on nuclear, one thing I would say about moving to the world of CCS is it's really nice that we're not in a situation where anything less than $1 billion is a rounding error. But having said that, we need everything. I think the key thing for me is just, in thinking about a system which is based on renewables, I think we've all agreed on that, you just got to look at the size of the gap that you're looking to plug with alternative technologies, and flexibility is key in that.
Okay. I've got one here, I think we'll go for you, Lindsay, which is the UK is the UK at risk of being a world leader in important renewables? What more should it be doing to grow its own industries and create export opportunities?
So I'm assuming this is all back to supply chain and capability, sorry. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding as to where we are today. You've got offshore wind farms delivering 50% UK content. You've got onshore wind farms heading for 70% UK content. It's a fallacy to believe that we import everything to do with the energy, the renewable energy that we have in our system. There are things that the UK is really good at. We are really good at innovation. We are really good at combining technologies. We are really good at developing projects, and we're really good at providing development services and consultancy. What we're not so good at is heavy manufacturing, and it can be done more cost effectively elsewhere. And I'll bring this back to the fact that there's still a consumer at the other end of this. What we need to do, if we do want some of those manufacturing jobs, we need to focus in on those tech pieces that are part of the puzzle that we are good at because of that innovation link, and make more of that. And the supply chain need to have the confidence that the market is going to be there and the business is going to be there. So we've done that with offshore wind really successfully, and we've seen some big investment there. We need to see that continuing, and we also need to build on those very strengths that we all know that we have in the UK.
I just wanted to come in on that, really just expanding it to CCS, because I think we are right now at the moment where we either push forwards with CCS at scale and become a world leader and grow our own industries and create that export potential in terms of our skills and our opportunities here, or we might lose the advantage to other markets, which are also now becoming incredibly ambitious in this space. And I think with CCS, with our experience in the oil and gas industry, our mature power sector, and the natural geological advantage that we've got in the UK, we've got a real opportunity here, and it would be a crying shame not to turn that into a strong competitive advantage.
Okay, thank you for that. Last quick round of questions, and then we're going to wrap up there. So it was actually one question I had for all of you. If the panelists could be granted one wish to move us significantly forward on the 2035 net zero challenge, what would it be? So should we go with, start with you, Chris, and then we'll come to Jeremy at the end.
Oh gosh, I don't really know. I don't have an answer for that one. I think that if I had a wish, well, I mean, if you had a wish, you'd just get to 2035 when you're happy with that. But it's a silly question. But if I had one wish, I think it would be those kind of very mundane concerns that I talked about. It's quite interesting. I mentioned earlier we're doing this work on progress reporting across the whole economy. Power sector is quite an interesting one because broadly, I mentioned this in the opening chat I gave. The ambition's in the right place, and it's one of the very few sectors where I think we can say that. Quite a strong history of delivering good things in the power sector as well. We are now moving toward, in that sector, and possibly maybe in one or two others, where it's not really about policy pushing things, it's about removing blockages in the path of doing things quickly. So I think it's the consenting stuff and the planning stuff that worries me most, actually. When you think about the infrastructure that needs to be thrown up around this country, particularly on the East Coast, that's the thing I'd like to see fixed, in inverted commas, as quickly and as swiftly as possible, in such a way that we still allow communities to have their voice and their engagement in that process. But that's what's going to hold us up, I think. So that would be my one wish.
Okay, Guy?
Yeah, I'm kind of wishing that my heat pump that's being installed next week is going to work as well as I hope, but I'm very confident in my heating engineers, so that should be fine. My one wish is local area energy planning, introduced as part of the Rio conditions and the price control process, that we set up the framework so the local authorities can do it properly and join up the stakeholders. That is absolutely essential piece of missing this journey, because when we're talking about EV infrastructure, we're talking about renewables infrastructure, we're talking about heat networks, etc. That planning thing is a massive problem. So coming up with a process which is hopefully going to clear through that, I think is essential.
Lindsay?
So on the basis Chris gets his wish, I'm assuming we can accumulate. I guess I just want the conversation. I want an acceptance of what the science is telling us. I want everybody to be on the same page and understand what we need to do. Simple as that.
Thank you.
Potentially a bit more parochially, I would like government to take forward a few power CCS projects, certainly more than one, in the next phase of the cluster sequencing competition when they announce that in a couple of months, and to push forwards with track 2 and future clusters ASAP.
I've got a long list of things I wish for, but I'm not part of it. Jeremy?
Good question, isn't it? Without under sort of playing the sheer challenge of building this infrastructure at the scale and pace that we've talked about, I guess my wish would be around these so-called critical system enablers, getting in place the architecture into which this new capacity will be built. So system governance, market arrangements, approach to networks, designing and delivering those networks. I'd include flexibility in those enablers too. My personal wish would be to have clarity and visibility about where that is going to land, to give us the confidence as we build the capacity it's into an operable, resilient system.
Okay, thank you. So we had a lot more questions. I really appreciate you all taking the time to put them on Slido. I'd like to say thanks to you, the audience, but I would really like to say thanks to a magnificent panel. If you could put your hands together and thank them, it's been great. So I think for me, it's clear that the net zero electricity system by 2035 is more than a target. It's a vital enabler to decarbonise the whole economy. And delivering is more than a project, it's no less than a national endeavour, and one which will involve every one of us in this room for the rest of our working lives. So on that point, I'd like to thank you all for being a great audience, and have a good time. Cheers.
Hey, you were great. You were.
finish on time as well. There's loads of questions.
I know, I see. He was great. He's a sort of, he's well known from his spirited questioning.